You can fake strength. You can fake confidence. You can fake kindness, ambition, even discipline, but only for a while. Eventually, the truth slips through, not in loud breakdowns or dramatic failures, but in small, precise behaviors, tiny cracks that show exactly who a man really is. Machiavelli knew this. In his world, full of liars, opportunists, and cowards, guessing wasn't an option. He had to know who was genuinely strong and who was just pretending. And he figured it out. He learned that weakness doesn't scream. It whispers. It leaks out through subtle patterns. Actions a man doesn't even realize he's showing. Strong men, they stay calm. They stay quiet. But weak men, they reveal themselves without even knowing it. And once you learn how to spot these signals, you gain an edge most people never will. An edge Machiavelli used like a weapon. Because if you can identify weakness before it becomes a threat, you win before the battle begins. These behaviors aren't obvious. Most people overlook them, but Machiavelli didn't. He studied people the way a predator studies its prey, carefully, intentionally, without mercy, and he found 3 core behaviors that give weak men away instantly. Let's start with the first. Overjustification. Here's the brutal truth. Weak men explain. Strong men decide. A man who's always defending his choices, always over-explaining why he did something, trying to make sure everyone understands him. He's not being honest. He's being insecure. Machiavelli saw this constantly. In courtrooms, in political meetings, in quiet conversations behind closed doors. The prince, the one with real power, barely spoke. He didn't need to. But the merchant, the advisor, the man pretending to hold weight, he couldn't shut up. Why? Because he didn't believe in his own decisions unless someone else approved of them. He needed agreement to feel certain. Not respect. Not fear. Just to be liked. And Machiavelli saw through it. He saw it for what it was. A man begging for permission to exist. Overjustification is never about logic. It's about fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of judgment. Fear of power. And here's the truth that stings. Any man who needs approval before he moves will never be trusted with real power. Because real power doesn't explain itself. It acts. Power means you make a move and don't justify it. You speak once. You let silence do the rest. You don't need everyone to understand because you already do. So the next time someone is repeating their point, trying to sound reasonable, or pushing how morally correct they are, you're not hearing strength. You're hearing internal collapse in slow motion. But that's just one signal. Let's move to the second. Weaponized niceness. This one is colder, more subtle, and far more dangerous. See, weak men don't always look weak. Sometimes they smile. They help. They flatter. They seem agreeable. But it's not kindness. It's submission dressed up as virtue. Strong men can be kind, absolutely. But their kindness is intentional. It's rare. It never costs them their self-respect. Weak men, on the other hand, they're agreeable all the time. They compliment people just to be liked. They avoid confrontation at any cost. They smile when they should speak. They apologize even when they're not wrong because they're afraid. And here's where it turns dangerous. When being nice doesn't get them what they want, they flip. They get bitter, sarcastic, passive-aggressive. Why? Because their kindness was never real. It was a strategy to avoid rejection, to avoid tension, to earn validation. When that fails, the mask slips. Machiavelli saw this in high-ranking officials and commoners alike. He once wrote, "A prince must know how to do wrong and not use it unless compelled." That's not fear. That's restraint. And there's a difference. Restraint is power under control. Weaponized niceness is fear pretending to be virtue. These men aren't standing tall. They're keeping their heads down, hoping no one steps on them. And the moment they feel ignored, pressured, or disrespected, the resentment comes pouring out. Machiavelli watched for this behavior constantly. Why? Because when tension rises, these men break. They crumble under pressure. They can't set boundaries. They can't say no without guilt. And they certainly can't lead. You give them power, and they'll collapse the moment things get difficult. And that brings us to the third signal, the most obvious, the most pathetic, and the most humiliating to witness. Display addiction. You've seen this man. He's everywhere. He always needs to be seen. He can't stand being overlooked for 5 minutes. He posts constantly. He exaggerates his wins. He performs like his life depends on applause because to him it does. And Machiavelli saw right through it. He understood something most people still miss. The man who needs to be seen is terrified of being forgotten. And that fear is not confidence. It's identity rot. Display addiction doesn't come from strength. It comes from panic. Because when the attention stops, he doesn't know who he is anymore. He thinks, if people aren't watching, if they're not clapping, if they're not admiring me, then I don't matter. And that kind of man is a liability. Because he'll do anything for attention. Exaggerate, backstab, reveal secrets, create enemies out of thin air, as long as someone's watching, because to him silence equals death, stillness equals irrelevance, and that fear makes him predictable, manipulatable, weak. So Machiavelli didn't need to attack these men. He just ignored them. He took away the spotlight, let them squirm in the silence, and every single time, they broke. While strong men train in private, build in silence, and strike without warning, the display addict falls apart the second no one is looking. That's why Machiavelli feared weak men more than wicked ones. Because at least wicked men have direction. Weak men want everything, but will trade anything to get it. Put all 3 of these behaviors together. The overjustifier, the fake nice appeaser, and the attention addict. And what you get isn't a villain. You get a void. A man so hollow, he becomes a reflection of whoever's standing closest. And that's what Machiavelli feared most. So what did Machiavelli do with this understanding? He didn't just spot weakness. He used it. He turned these fragile behaviors into leverage, into tools, into silent weapons. Because if you can identify a weak man early, you don't just avoid betrayal. You predict it. You control it. Weak men don't break when tested. They melt. And when it comes to politics, power, trust, or war, you can't depend on someone who melts. So how do you protect yourself? You watch. You study. You stop judging people by what they say and start judging them by what they show. Not their words. Not their smiles. Not their titles. You pay attention to their patterns. You ask, how do they behave when no one agrees with them? When no one's watching? When the praise dries up? When there's no reward for acting good? Because here's the difference. Strong men build in silence. They sharpen their edge. They prepare. Weak men? They perform. They over-explain. They beg. They collapse. And once you can spot that, instantly, you gain one of the most underrated weapons in existence. Discernment. The ability to see what others miss. To detect what someone really is underneath the surface. Not who they're pretending to be, but who they'll become the second life stops going their way. This is how Machiavelli chose allies. It's how he avoided being blindsided. It's how he outlasted men who were louder, richer, more popular. Because he could see the storm before it arrived. See, behavior never lies. And Machiavelli knew this. When a man talks too much, smiles too wide, or can't sit still without applause, he's not just weak, he's programmable. So Machiavelli didn't confront these men. He guided them. He used them. Like puppets. He didn't argue. He didn't debate. He didn't fight them for power. He let them hold the strings. But he chose where those strings led. Here's how he did it. When he spotted the overjustifier, the man who always needed to explain himself, he didn't correct him. He listened. He nodded. He made eye contact. He said things like, that makes perfect sense. And just like that man attached himself to Machiavelli. He craved that rare validation. He became loyal, not because he respected Machiavelli, but because Machiavelli made him feel understood. And people will go to war for the ones who make them feel understood. Then came the people pleaser, the compulsive helper, the agreeable man. Machiavelli would give him a role, make him feel chosen, create the illusion that he was part of something important. And that man? He'd never betray Machiavelli. Not because of real loyalty, but because betraying him would mean losing the only thing holding his shaky self-worth together. Then there was the display addict, the man who needed attention like oxygen. Machiavelli didn't reject him. He gave him the stage, let him speak in public, Let him take credit for safe ideas. Let him wear the costume of leadership. But behind the scenes? Machiavelli wrote the script. Because he knew this. Give a weak man the illusion of power, and he'll never question who actually holds it. This is how empires are built. Not with armies. Not with screaming. Not even with visible authority. With psychological engineering. You find the weak. Then you let them build your kingdom with their desperate desire to be seen, included, important. And if they ever turn on you, you don't need to retaliate. You just pull away. Take the spotlight away. Withdraw the approval. And they'll self-destruct trying to get it back. Because nothing breaks a weak man faster than being ignored by the person who once made him feel strong. This is the Machiavellian art of handling weakness. You don't expose them. You use them. While they chase approval, you acquire power. While they dance for attention, you remain still. Silent. Watching. But Machiavelli had one more rule. And it might be the coldest of all. Never let a weak man believe he's your equal. Because the second he does, he'll forget who built him. He'll fantasize about rebellion. He'll start thinking he doesn't need you. So Machiavelli kept the gap wide. Always. He gave just enough reward to keep them moving. But never enough for them to forget who they depended on. And if one ever stepped out of line, he didn't get angry. He didn't punish. He replaced him. Because there's never a shortage of weak men willing to serve you. But there is only one you. This is Machiavellian strategy in its purest form. Not domination through force, but influence through instinct. Not managing people, but puppeteering their insecurities so they choose loyalty. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need a title. You don't even need to be in the spotlight. All you need is one thing. Understanding. Because once you know how a weak man thinks, how he panics, how he seeks approval, what he fears, you don't need to fight him. You guide him. Silently. Strategically. Completely. That's how Machiavelli moved through courts, alliances, and power plays without lifting a sword. He let weak men come to him. He became their mirror, their calm, their architect. To the over-explainer, he was a listener. To the people-pleaser, he was safety. To the attention addict, he was the audience. But none of it was real. It was control, dressed as friendship, wrapped in silence, delivered with precision. This is what you need to understand if you want real power. The best kind of control is the kind they never see. When they think the decision is theirs. When they feel proud to serve you. Not because you demanded it, but because they wanted to. Let's break this down even further. Because what Machiavelli mastered wasn't just control. It was invisible control. The kind that doesn't require status, shouting, or a stage. It starts with one simple tactic. Speak less than they expect. The weaker the man, the more he craves constant affirmation. So when you go silent, intentionally silent, he overcompensates. He fills the silence. He explains too much. He starts revealing what he fears, what he wants, what he's willing to trade. And that's where your power begins. Because when you finally do speak, your words carry weight. They feel rare, earned. That small nod of approval, that one compliment, it becomes gold in his mind. He talks about it. He thinks about it. He works for more of it. Now he's not just working with you. He's working for something you've planted inside him. A craving. Second, be the calm in their storm. Weak men live in emotional chaos. They spiral when they're criticized. They panic when ignored. They chase stability they can't create within themselves. So you become the opposite of their instability. You stay composed. You don't flinch. You don't overcorrect. You don't react. This contrast creates gravity. To them, you become the steady figure in a world that feels like it's falling apart. And they assume, he must know something I don't. They begin to follow you. Not because you ask them to, but because they believe you're in control. They project strength onto you because they can't find it in themselves. And that projection gives you power they'll never understand. Third, reward with unpredictability. This is the one most people miss. You don't reward consistently. You don't flatter them every time they seek it. You become a mystery. Some days you acknowledge them. Other days you vanish. Sometimes you say yes. Sometimes you say nothing at all. Why? Because uncertainty creates obsession. They never know when your approval is coming, so they keep performing. They keep guessing. They keep watching you. Now you're not just a leader in their life, you're a fixation. And here's where the real psychological control begins. They start fearing your silence. They fear your absence. You no longer need to correct them. Your silence becomes a mirror. And that mirror shows them exactly who they are when you're not there to validate them. Now they belong to you, not through fear, not through punishment, but through a dependency they don't even realize they've developed. This is the art of turning weak men into tools of your rise. And the beauty of it? They'll never know. They'll call it admiration. They'll call it friendship. They'll believe they chose you. But you'll know the truth. You saw their cracks. You studied their behavior. And while they tried to survive through noise, you rose through silence. But Machiavelli knew this game wasn't just about others. It was about himself too. Because there's one fear greater than being betrayed by the weak. Being weakened from within. He understood something most people still ignore. Weakness isn't just something you spot in others. It's something you must hunt within yourself. Every single day. Because it doesn't show up as obvious failure. It sneaks in. Through over-explaining. Through the urge to be liked. Through the craving for applause. Through the apologies you make, not because you're wrong, but because you're afraid. Machiavelli believed self-mastery was war. A daily war. And if you lose even one battle, the world will spot the crack before you do. So he developed a system. A way to catch himself slipping before anyone else could. Here's how he did it. First, he monitored how he explained himself. He noticed when he started justifying too much, repeating his point, adjusting his tone to fit the room. Each time he asked himself, am I speaking from conviction? Or am I begging for acceptance? If it was the second, he stopped. Immediately. Because a man who begs for validation forfeits authority. Even if no one else sees it, he does. And that's enough to weaken the foundation. Second, he watched how often he said yes. Most people think yes is kind. Machiavelli saw it as dangerous. He knew one weak yes could ruin everything. Saying yes to avoid conflict. Saying yes to gain approval. Saying yes without boundaries. So he trained himself to pause before every agreement and ask, would I say yes if I didn't fear losing their approval? If the answer was no, he said no. No apology. No excuse. Because a diluted yes leads to a diluted life. Third, he measured his comfort in silence. Weak men hate silence. They rush to fill it. They make jokes. They compliment. They overshare. Because silence reveals insecurity. But Machiavelli embraced it. He trained himself to lean into it, to sit inside the tension while others squirmed. Because when silence becomes your ally, your presence becomes your power. You intimidate without trying. You control the room without speaking. You unsettle the weak without lifting a finger. Fourth, he avoided unnecessary exposure. The weak crave visibility. The strong choose it. Machiavelli practiced strategic invisibility. He let others announce themselves, chase attention, perform for approval. Meanwhile, he moved in the shadows. Watched. Waited. So when he finally appeared, it wasn't seen as effort. It was seen as arrival. He didn't build anticipation with noise. He built it through absence. That was no accident. That was design. He removed every visible weakness from himself. Before the world ever had the chance to weaponize it against him. Because most men try to look powerful. Machiavelli built himself so that he couldn't be broken. And that's the difference. You don't win by appearing strong. You win by making sure there's nothing inside you that someone else can exploit. So ask yourself, do I need to be liked before I led? Do I explain when silence would have been stronger? Do I say yes to avoid tension? Do I talk to be heard or to be agreed with? These aren't personality traits. They're warnings. They reveal your limits. And once you see them, you only have two choices. Feed them. And stay exactly where you are. Or kill them. And become something they can't ignore. Because in this world, you're not punished for being cruel. You're punished for being predictable. Emotional. Weak. So you strip it out. Bit by bit. Word by word. Until one day you speak and people freeze. You move and people adjust. You lead and no one questions how you got there. Because you didn't demand respect. You engineered it. And that's what Machiavelli knew better than anyone else. That the highest form of respect doesn't come from being liked. It comes from becoming the one thing weak men fear most. A presence they can't figure out. When you walk into a room and don't need to prove anything. When your silence hits harder than their speeches. When you say less and it echoes more. You become a standard. And weak men adjust to you. Because they see in you what they've failed to build in themselves. That's the final Machiavellian tactic. Make your respect expensive. Don't flatter for free. Don't give praise casually. Don't smile unless you mean it. Make people earn it. Because when they realize you're not moved by charm, pressure, or noise, they rise to your level. Or disappear. And either way, you win. You win not by overpowering them, but by outlasting them. Not with noise, but with silence. Not with performance, but with presence. Because that's the Machiavellian truth. You don't destroy weak men by attacking them. You destroy them by never needing to. And that is real power.